Welcome, everybody. It is a pre-Christmas edition of Real Steel Sports on Spreaker Web Radio. I hope everybody's having a great holiday season. I know I am. I'm having a lot of fun doing things with my friends and my girlfriend and watching all the amazing sports. I hope everybody's enjoying the college bowl season. I might talk about that a little bit later on. I've been helping a couple of my friends through some tough times, and hopefully when it comes down to it between those two, everything works out for the best. Now, let's get started. It is that time. It's coming up. This is the final week of the 2014-15 NFL regular season. And I'm sorry, this is the most excited I've been for a finale in the NFL for years. What I love about the NFL, and the one thing that they have done right over the last few years, is a few years ago they modified the schedule where in the season finale you could only play a division opponent. And if you look at what that's done, that's created so many tight races and so many amazing games. And this weekend we got three week 17 games that will decide the divisions. Lions-Packers for the NFC North, Falcons-Panthers for the NFC South, and my Pittsburgh Steelers against the Cincinnati Bengals for the AFC North. So before we get talking about all these playoffs and scenarios and all that crazy shit, I think it would be a really, really good idea if we took a minute and projected out the rest of the 2014-15 regular season. And I'm going to do that with my good friend, the NFL Playoff Machine. I did it in an earlier segment about a month ago. It's been a while since I've used it. But this is the tool that I use to go ahead and predict how I think the rest of the regular season is going to go. And I hope that everybody is excited for that to happen. So let's start picking these games. The first game we have this weekend, of course, is going to be a big one because it could determine the playoff fate of one team. The Browns at the Ravens. I'm going with the Ravens at home because they're playing for their playoff lives. And with Hoyer and Manziel both injured and Manziel officially sidelined, Cleveland doesn't really have much of a chance to go into Baltimore and beat the Ravens. That would be a real big surprise. I like the Cowboys over the Redskins. I think they'll play their starters because I have a funny feeling that Dallas is going to try to still get that number one seed. Let's put it this way. If Arizona, Seattle, and Detroit all lose, I'm trying to think how that would play out, but Dallas still has a chance to get that number one seed. It's still a great possibility they could do it, and not having to leave Dallas for the rest of the season until the Super Bowl, I think would be something they would very much look forward to. I'm picking the Colts over the Texans tentatively, and I say that like this. The Colts offense the last three games, the output has been abysmal. You look at what they did against the Cowboys, just getting blown out, only scoring 7 points. Their offense is averaging just over 16 points per game the last 3 weeks, and it's not been getting the job done. Andrew Luck has way too many interceptions, and although he has over 30, I believe he had 38, 39 touchdowns this season, he's still throwing way too many interceptions for the Colts to really have a chance, in my opinion, to make a huge playoff run. They could definitely do it, but it would be tough. Meaningless game, the Texans over the Jaguars. I know the Texans could technically make the playoffs, but they need a lot of help. And they need several teams to lose and several other teams to win. So it's going to be a real tough test for them. Now, this is the first non-division deciding game that is really going to be a key one. It's San Diego at Kansas City, because Kansas City can still make the playoffs. Absolutely. They can still get in. I believe NFL.com gave them like a 2% chance because, for one, the Browns have to beat the Ravens, they have to beat the Chargers, and the Jaguars have to beat the Texans, which, in the grand scheme of things, really is almost impossible because there's no way Cleveland's going to go into Baltimore and get beaten and is going to go into Baltimore and beat the Ravens. I'd be surprised. So now we got the Chargers and the Chiefs, and you know what? San Diego's comeback over San Francisco last week was nothing short of miraculous. I was over a friend's house actually, and I was following the game on my phone because we were kind of hanging out and whatnot, having a fun time, and I remember just keep getting the updates that San Diego's pulling closer, and all of a sudden they tie the game, and then they win it late in overtime. I mean, that was as interesting of a game as I've seen, because it kind of summed up the collapse of the Jim Harbaugh era in San Francisco all in one, while at the same time it gave San Diego life to make the playoffs, because if they had lost to the 49ers, they'd have been out. And I think that's going to transfer. The one thing Kansas City can do the Chargers cannot really counter is run the football. Jamal Charles, one of the best running backs in the game right now, is having a very good season. And San Diego, while they're decent at playing run defense, they're going to have to play one of their best games this season going into Kansas City. And besides, I give them a really good chance for this reason. Phillip Rivers is playing very, very well right now, and they're on a roll. So I'm going to go with San Diego. I like the Dolphins over the Jets in another meaningless game. I know the Dolphins are the same record right now as the Chiefs, but the difference is the fact that due to tiebreakers, they are officially eliminated. I like the Bears over the Vikings to kind of maybe get some kind of positive spin on this season. Because, let's put it this way, beating a division rival in their own house in the season finale, that'll give you some little emotional boost. Because think about it this way, pretty much the entire coaching staff's going to be gone by the end of the season. I like the Patriots over the Bills, even if the Patriots weren't playing their starters. Because think about it. Gronkowski said he's preparing to play the whole game. So if the tight end who's suffered numerous leg injuries over the past few years is ready to play, and he played the whole game, that means that Bill Belichick's not going to let his players take this one off. He's going to make them still play the whole time because he doesn't want them rusty going into the playoffs. I like the Eagles over the Giants in a somewhat a meaningless game. Eagles are 9-6 right now, and they are eliminated from playoff contention. I like the Saints over the Buccaneers in Tampa. Again, this could really be, a tough nut to crack because the Saints have lost five straight games at home. They've been horrible at home, but on the road they've been average. It's funny. I've never seen the Saints do this horrible at home and this bad on the road in my years of being a fan of them. So I'm going to go with the Saints. The Falcons and the Panthers, the first division deciding of those games. The first game where the winner of this game takes the division. And I'm going with Atlanta for this reason. I feel that though Carolina's defense has played well the last few games, they held down Cleveland, they held down New Orleans, I would be shocked if they were able to do the same to Atlanta. Because if you look at what the Atlanta Falcons are doing in their division, if they win this game, they'll have swept their division. But they'll only have one win against the rest of the league. So against their division, they've been cleaning up. The way it looks, though, is that Carolina is able to run the football. Like, that's going to be something that the Falcons are going to have to try to counter because Jonathan Stewart, I believe, is the third leading rusher in the NFL since Week 12. And if you look at the Falcons' run defense, it's been a little stingier as of late. They held the Steelers to 45 yards rushing, and they held the Saints to 57. And although they gave up 179 in Green Bay, which was a pretty interesting game on a Monday night a few weeks ago, they gave up 35 to the Cardinals. So they've been really shutting down opponents' run defenses, particularly in Atlanta. I'm going with the Falcons because while Cam Newton is playing very well coming off the injury to his back from the car accident, which I'm glad to see him back healthy, Jonathan Stewart and him are not going to be enough. Kelvin Benjamin probably going to have a big game. Greg Olsen, I think, will have a good game. This looks like it could be a shootout. But the reason why I'm sticking with the Falcons is the fact the Georgia Dome is such a tough place to play as a visitor, particularly a visitor from your own division. Teams like Carolina, that don't really travel as well, it's going to be tougher for them. So I'm going with Atlanta. Green Bay hosting Detroit in the other division take-all matchup. The last time the Detroit Lions beat Green Bay in Green Bay, I wasn't even born yet. I just turned 22 years old. It was 1991. December 15th, 1991 was the last time the Lions beat the Packers in Green Bay. To put that in perspective, Brett Favre, I don't even think was a member of the team yet. No, he was not a member of the team yet. He was still a scrub for the Atlanta Falcons. Detroit this year has given teams a lot of problems with their pass rush with Ziggy Ansah and Ndamukong Suh. And their secondary has played remarkably well. Rasheed Mathis has had like a rejuvenation at the cornerback. And DeAndre Levy at linebacker has been one of the biggest snubs for the Pro Bowl. And Green Bay, though, if you look at what Aaron Rodgers is doing at home this year, he's not thrown a home interception since 2012. And if you look at his splits at home, they're just absurd. At home, these are his numbers this year. He is completing 144 of 218 passes for 2,108 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. His quarterback rating is 132.6. The guy has just been on fire at home the last few years. And I don't think it's a coincidence. He's got so many great players, and teams don't like going up to Green Bay to play him. However, Detroit is not the same Detroit Lions that are just going to lie down and play dead. They're going to give Green Bay a hell of a fight. Dominic Raiola, the center for the Lions, his suspension, that could potentially be a problem because it'll be tough to, maybe it's a little bit tougher at the point of attack to run the football. But the reason why it shouldn't worry Lions fans too much is that Green Bay's defense, you can move the ball on them pretty easily. And I'm going to demonstrate that right here. Green Bay is 10th in pass defense, respectable. But they are 22nd in rush defense and 20th in yards allowed per attempt. And Detroit's running game has been pretty decent the last few weeks. They put up 113 on Tampa, 80 on the Vikings, and 138 on the Bears. While their season total's not impressive, they're only 27th in the league. The fact that they're playing better and now running the football should worry Green Bay. But on that same note, I see it to be almost impossible for Green Bay to lose at home to New England, to lose at home to Detroit, I should say, in the season finale. It's one thing to go into Detroit and lose, but coming to Green Bay, the Eagles had a pretty decent defense. It was similar to Detroit's, where they got consistent pressure from their front, usually rushed 4 to 5 guys, and Aaron Rodgers carved them up. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to quote-unquote carve them up, but what I do think is that it's going to be extremely tough for the Lions to continuously get off the field and keep Aaron Rodgers on the bench. So for that matchup, I'm going with Green Bay. And if you look at the offense, it's pretty much an unstoppable force versus immovable object. Green Bay is 6th in offense, Detroit is 2nd in defense, so it's going to be a tug of war. But the home field advantage definitely goes to Green Bay. And this is kind of a weird scenario right here. If the Broncos lose at home to the Raiders and the Steelers beat the Bengals on Monday night, that gives the Steelers second seed in the playoffs and a bye. But it's not going to happen because I don't care how bad Peyton Manning's played lately. I don't really care how bad the defense or how many turnovers they're committing. It's the Raiders in Denver. Denver should kick the living shit out of them. I like the 49ers to beat the Cardinals to kind of end the Jim Harbaugh era on a somewhat of a high note, beating a division rival and preventing them from winning their division. Because let's put it this way. If Arizona loses to San Francisco, Seattle doesn't have to do anything and they still win the division because they'll play St. Louis. I'm going with Seattle to beat St. Louis, and by virtue of that tiebreaker, that gives the Seattle Seahawks the number 1 seed in the playoffs. That would knock Green Bay to number 2. Now, the NFC playoff picture would be set. I have Dallas at 3rd, Atlanta at 4th, Arizona at 5th, and Detroit at 6th. That's how I see this playing out, the way that it's going to go. Now, the AFC playoff picture, we got one more game. My Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'll be honest, this game has me a little worried because of the way that Cincinnati handled Peyton Manning on Monday night. But in a way, I'm actually not that worried. Because right now, the Steelers and the Bengals are 5-2 where they're playing. The Bengals 5-2 are on the road. The Steelers are 5-2 at home. The Steelers are 2nd in offense, 20th in defense. The Bengals are 15th in offense and 22nd in defense. It's kind of funny because the whole year people have been joking at the expense of the Steelers' defense, and yet the Bengals are actually ranking lower in total defense than the Steelers do. This is going to be an interesting game for this reason. I said a few weeks ago before the game in Cincinnati that if the Steelers were to beat the Bengals in Cincinnati, they would lose the rematch at home to Pittsburgh. They would win the rematch on the road in Pittsburgh. And I stuck by that for a while and kind of wavered in my opinion after seeing what happened on Monday night. But the more that I think about that now, the more that I'm coming to the conclusion that I think the Bengals are actually in trouble in Pittsburgh because I watched a lot of the highlights of that game. Peyton Manning threw some absolute ducks. I mean, he can deny it all he wants. He is drastically losing strength in his arm, and it's starting to get progressively worse as the season goes along. If I'm a betting man, I'm not taking too much stock in trade in Denver going to the Super Bowl because Peyton Manning's arm is not going to get it done this year. They're really going to have to buckle down on defense and running the football. So that would go ahead, and that would kind of nullify what the Bengals did on defense. But they were able to get after him with a four-man front. Now, the reason why that's kind of a tough matchup that's kind of a tougher matchup against the Steelers is this. Because the Broncos are a very good offense, but they don't really have that extreme legitimate deep threat. We have Martavis Bryant, we have Antonio Brown, we have Marcus Wheaton. Three guys that I think are very comparable. I think that trio is very comparable to Eric Decker, to Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, and Emmanuel Sanders. I think we have a better trio of receivers than they do. But the huge difference between us and the Broncos is the running game. If you look at statistically right now where things rank, the Steelers are churning out so many more yards per game on the ground. They're doing it with a greater efficiency. And if you look at what Denver's been doing on the road this year, running the football, 36 at Seattle, 43 at New England, 28 again at St. Louis, and 85 against the Bengals. Their rushing totals on the road have been very subpar. And if you look at Peyton Manning's performance in the last few games, the Broncos have failed to hit 30 points since right before Thanksgiving. So they've been hitting a hell of a cold stretch. The Bengals are going to have to account for an all-purpose back in Le'Veon Bell, and that's a real matchup nightmare for the Bengals defense because the pass rush doesn't have near the bite that it did last year, and Ben Roethlisberger kind of carved him up. And I don't think Ben is going to play quite as well as he did, but I think the Steelers have a good chance. Now, the other side, A.J. Green's going to play. He injured his forearm and didn't have a catch against the Broncos on Monday night. But on the same side, when you think about it, let's see. I'd like to think that Andy Dalton is going to struggle. I think he's going to have another rough game at Pittsburgh because James Harrison will play this one. He didn't play the game in Cincinnati. The fact that Ike Taylor may or may not play, which actually might be a good thing considering Taylor was pretty much destroyed by A.J. Green in the first game. I think of it like this. The Steelers are getting the right guys back from injuries. They're getting the right guys. They're playing the system well. The defense the last few weeks has played incredible. And I'll be honest, I don't look at Cincinnati's offense with an slightly injured A.J. Green as being that much more effective than Kansas City's. I really don't. And going into Pittsburgh against that offense with a defense that, doesn't have the kind of pass rush it did last year, give me the Steelers all the way. So with all that being said, as I predicted before the season started, I said that the Steelers would make the playoffs and win the division and be the third seed. And I was right. I'm going to be right again after this is all said and done. So that makes the playoff picture this. New England and Denver 1 and 2, Pittsburgh, Indy 3 and 4, Cincinnati and San Diego 5 and 6. Now as for the playoff matchups themselves, you can really kind of take what you want to. You can kind of think about it any way you want to because you got some really good games. And if you look at it from my perspective, every team in the playoffs is dangerous this year. This isn't like a couple years ago where you'd have maybe 2 or 3 teams that were good and the rest were kind of also-rans. Other than Atlanta, and I even think they've got a really good chance, every team in this playoff run is dangerous. If I were to think right now of the 2 best teams from each conference, I'm going with Pittsburgh and New England out of the AFC, and I'm going to go with Dallas and Seattle out of the NFC. Green Bay is a very strong pick if you want to talk about a Super Bowl. But at that same time, Green Bay's defense, I still question them because when they don't get turnovers, they run into problems. Because the game against Atlanta was much closer than it should have been. Rodgers had a really good game, and yet they still barely beat the Pack. They still barely beat the Falcons. So the way I think it's going is this. The 2 wildcard games in the AFC, I like Pittsburgh over San Diego, and I like Cincinnati over Indianapolis. I like Cincinnati over Indianapolis for this reason. Because I think that Cincinnati's defense can take advantage of a Colts offense that's been sputtering. And the thing about it is this. Cincinnati can go ahead and blitz Andrew Luck all day long because they don't have to worry about the Colts running the football. So I'll go with Cincy in an upset, and then I'll go with Pittsburgh at home. I would say Pittsburgh to Denver and Cincy to New England. Even after what I said about Denver, I'm still going with them over Pittsburgh because of this. Pittsburgh has a problem. They're pass blocking. Ben Roethlisberger's still getting hit a lot this year. He is. And the Broncos defense has Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. That is a nightmare to go against if you're the Steelers' front five. So I think Denver's probably going to put about 33, 34 points on us. But I'm not looking for the Steelers to top 24. So I think the Steelers will probably lose. I'd love to see them beat them, absolutely. But at the same time, being realistic. As for the Patriots and the Bengals, same as it was earlier in the season. Patriots blew them out. They'll blow them out again. And then for the AFC title game, give me New England over Denver. So Belichick and Brady advanced to their 6 Super Bowls, a coach and a quarterback. Ridiculous what they've done in this era. Now in the NFC, I'm going with Atlanta over Arizona. Yes, I'm going with Atlanta over Arizona. And the records may look misleading, the teams may look misleading, but think about it this way. These two teams played not too long ago, and Arizona got the hell beat out of them. And the thing that makes this even bigger nightmare for Arizona is this. The Georgia Dome's a tough place to play. The Falcons' offense is very good. And what Julio Jones did to Patrick Peterson was almost like dirty in the first game. He just burnt Patrick Peterson up and down the field. And even if they find a way to isolate Julio Jones and maybe he'll limit him to 3 or 4 catches, how do you plan to cover Roddy White and Harry Douglas? Some really good underneath players. So I go with Atlanta over Arizona. And I think it will be a decently close game, but I think Atlanta will pull away in the end. I like Dallas over Detroit for the simple fact that while Detroit had a very good season, they're not going to have enough offense to beat the Cowboys in Dallas. And I think what makes this even a tougher matchup for Detroit is that Des Bryant, Terrence Williams, and Jason Witten, and that whole offensive scheme is going to be a nightmare because the Lions have a decent secondary. If you look at where they rank in terms of pass defense right now, they're 13th in the league. They have 20 interceptions, which is second most in the game. And if you look at the opponent's pass rating against them, it's 80.8. Not really not really impressive total by any means necessary. However, the way that I still think about it is that Tony Romo at home in Dallas, Romo's had a hell of a season. I got to give him credit for it, so I'm going to take Dallas. So that would send Dallas to Green Bay and Atlanta to Seattle. Richard Sherman will probably be able to handle Julio Jones for most of the game. Might need a little bit of help. Even though Sherman's a great player, Julio Jones has been just electric this year. But none of the other weapons for Atlanta are going to be able to make an impact. And besides, that team, that environment, that defense in Seattle is still a nightmare to go against. I'm going with Atlanta. I'll go with Seattle. Green Bay and Dallas, best game on paper in the playoffs. I go with Green Bay. Because, again, the snow and the cold going up to Green Bay is going to be an absolute hell of a tough test for the Dallas Cowboys. Because as good as they've been on the road this year, they haven't lost a game on the road. You still got to remember that Green Bay at home and Aaron Rodgers, 23 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, is ridiculously good. So I go with Green Bay and Dallas over Dallas. I go with Seattle over Green Bay in the same result as there was in Week 1. I predict that Seattle will advance to the Super Bowl and they will defeat the New England Patriots to win their second straight title. So guys, that's pretty much all I got for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed that segment. And please be sure to check my other ones. I should be doing sports shows more often too. I got winter breaks, so heck, I got all the time in the world to do these things. Take care and have a good one, everybody.